G'day, Mike from Aussie Mike's Bees on another swarm call out. It's the 7th of January, midsummer here, and I haven't had a call out for several weeks at this stage, and I was thinking that's it for the season, but here we go. And it's only about 10 minutes away from where I live, which is handy, and it's at a place where I went for a swarm catch in a tree when I first got my everything bee vac. So spring before last, I think that was. I can't remember exactly now, I'd have to look it up. So we're on our way for that. This time they're on a fence post apparently. So we're on our way, and we'll see what we get. It's a beautiful sunny day after just so much wet weather. All the other bees are out there foraging, happy to be in the sunshine. It's not been a great year for honey because of all the wet. But now hopefully we'll get some dry weather and things will pick up. Anyway, on with the swarm and see what we find. How pretty is this country, eh? We're just about there, and this is the country that I live in. Kurrajong Heights area. So we're just coming up to where I was last time, and this is the place, and the last one was on that little tree right there, and I used the everything bee vac to vacuum them all up because they're all around the trunk of that little tree. This time they're in a fence post, so I'll head on down the driveway and see what we find. So we've got a closed driveway, so we'll get down there and see what we find. Here we are, I've just come down to the yard, and here it is. It's another fence post one, and we've got this tiny little swarm on the post. Now Les, the owner of the property, said there were a lot more there last night, but maybe so, maybe no. It might have just looked like a bigger crowd of bees then. So she's a tiny little one, probably some sort of secondary swarm, but always worth getting. So the big box that I brought, it's a full-size 8 frame. That's too big for this tiny little colony. I was going to bring a nuke, and I thought it sounded like a big colony. Should have got him to take a picture. That's all right. I'm going to vac them up in the everything bee vac and take them home in the bee vac bucket, and I'll put them into a nuke then. All right, we're all set. A lot of them around the other side, and very calm, which is pretty normal for swarms. I'm still in my gear, and I've got the bee vac on my back, so I'll just start him up and start vacuuming these up. So it'll be a bit noisy, of course. Just trying to get the control in a spot. Just trying to set the speed so it's not too strong. And what I do is just work my way from the bottom. You don't need to be forceful. They like to hang on to each other, hooking each other's legs together. I think part of the advantage of vacuuming like this is, and coming from the bottom, if any of them are giving off an alarm pheromone, it gets sucked away with the vacuum. So they just stay calm. And they almost don't even realise their sisters have been disappearing. I'm keeping an eye out for the queen, but if she's in the middle of one of these clumps, I'm not going to notice. Oh, big bunch of them there, so I'll just bounce them a little. Down they go. Let's just keep doing this slowly and patiently. Reasonably thick. Well, it's still not a very big colony, but let's see. Little nuke box will do well, I think. Just going to go around the other side. I was talking to the neighbour, rather the owner, and saying the neighbour keeps bees, and I can see them. Like, this is a 10-acre block here, but you can see over the hill the neighbour, and I'll see if I can shoot a bit of footage before I head off to show you. And she's got a few hives over there, so it's a possibility that this is from her. They don't normally fly very far when they swarm, because the queen's not really good at flying, even when she's been starved to lose weight. Just a gorgeous day. It's about 25 degrees Celsius. And when they swarmed yesterday, it had been raining most of the day, and it just started being sunny. Got to say, I really like this Everything Bee vac. You probably heard me banging on about it before. I assure you, I get no compensation or kickback or anything from the Everything Bee vac company. I just think it's a brilliant product. Battery operated, so it's easy to run out here in a paddock. Don't have to have a generator to run what you might call traditional bee vacs. And I've run this thing for hours on some jobs. And the guy that developed it, I'll put his name down in the on screen about now, because I just can't remember his name right now. He said he spent quite a bit of time working on the requirements, and one of the requirements was to be able to run it for quite a few hours, because apart from the actual, when you're actually vacuuming them, you still might have a drive ahead of you to get them back to the apiary, and they need air circulation for that time. So you just turn the motor right down, and that has a steady airflow, keeping them from overheating and asphyxiating. So there are alternatives to this method, or an alternative that I can think of. For a fence post job like this, I could rig up a mount, or like a little stand, and put a box right next to them, and maybe with a bit of swarm commander inside, and they could then just decide to march in. And that works really well too. You just need a little bit of different equipment. I guess you wouldn't say more equipment, it's just different equipment. By having some sort of adjustable stand, and then instead of vacuuming along, which as you can see it's not super fast, it's not like bouncing a branch of a tree and shaking all the bees into the box in one big hit. You know, it is a slow, methodical technique, quite gentle. So time-wise, to do set up a box and get them to march in compared to vacuuming, I'm not sure. I haven't tested that yet. Maybe that's a topic for another video one day. I've done just that when they're on the ground. I think I've put that online, so where the swarm actually fell out of the tree onto the grass in the backyard. So I gathered up the fallen branch and shook them into the box, and then the rest of them just marched in over time. I actually left the site for a while and came back afterwards. So it definitely works. And of course, if you can get the queen in a cage, they'll definitely go wherever you put her. I still haven't spotted the queen. Tell me if you did in the comments below. Sometimes they can get a bit of a clog going on there, and I just got to bounce them to shake them loose. It's done the trick. So this narrow nozzle was chosen so that it can fit down between combs. So when you're doing a cutout from a wall or a log, there's usually that bee space between combs. And this does a pretty good job. It sort of pushes up against them, but you can vacuum the bees that are in between the combs up. And that narrow opening gives a little bit more of wind velocity to draw them in. I can still vacuum them up with just the nozzle off and the round end of the hose. But it doesn't have quite the vacuum punch that it does with this nozzle on. And it's a balance between keeping the speed low enough that you don't bounce the bees around too much in the hose, and when they get to the bucket, and having enough of a vacuum to pull them in and actually get them down the hose. So when you get a big clump like that, they can stick. So that's why you just gently take out a few at a time and unhook them, and down they go. Oh, bigger. See how big that clump is. So if I just give that a little tap and shake their grip loose. A few more flying now. You might start noticing that their sisters are disappearing. I still haven't seen the queen, so again, if anybody there have seen her on this little pile, it's a bit of a queen spotting exercise for you. I got to say, I'm not as good at spotting queens and catching them as Mr. Red is, or 628 Dirt Rooster. They're masters at it. One day after all this COVID business is done, I'd like to get over there and visit them, and maybe they can give me a few tips. So vacuuming up swarms is good because they've got no honey everywhere. When you do a cutout with this, sometimes there's just so much honey when you're cutting the comb and framing it up with rubber bands. There's enough spillage of honey that, you know, sometimes the bees are coated in it and it starts sucking them into the hose as well. And then it gets sticky inside the hose, and then clumps of bees can all get stuck there. So what do you do for that? Well, that's where you've got to use the speed control, and you just give it a shot of maximum suck and it can dislodge them. But it can become an ongoing problem, especially if it's a really big colony that you're doing a rescue on. And well, sometimes you just got to stop and take a break and remove the hose from the vac if you haven't got a spare one. So that's the alternative, keep a couple of spare hoses so if they do get honeyed up, you can just continue. But otherwise, just stop work, take it off and get to a hose and just rinse it all out and get all that honey out from the inside. Of course, then you've got a wet inside hose, but that's not as bad as sticky honey. I'd certainly welcome any other ideas if you can think of something about that too. I'll welcome your comments. Of course, if you like what you're seeing here, hit that like button, share it with your fellow beekeepers or your non-beekeeper friends. If you want to see more of my content and hear about it, hit the subscribe button and ring that little bell. They tell me that then notifies you when I release something new. Now, I'm not a super prolific YouTube generator. I don't put out videos every day, and sometimes there'll be weeks go past, so I'm not going to be hassling you with lots of videos. But I've got some projects in the mill. I've been working on a long-lang project. I've done 3 parts to it. Got probably 2 more parts to it to go. Part 4 and part 5. Some other videos I'll be doing is beekeeping gadgets. And I come from a technology industry, so I am just an amateur beekeeper. Become quite obsessed by it all in the few years that I've been at it. And just some of the equipment that you can get now. So I'm doing a series of gadget videos, and some of you, by the time you see this, it'll already be out. What gadgets, you ask? Well, some of it's extracting honey type gadgets, but one I've only just recently taken delivery of from the US is a a trolley that's designed to lift the boxes. So yay, I don't have to physically lift the box off the hive myself, and it can in fact lift the entire hive. So brood box and some supers, because they get pretty heavy when they're full of honey. And already I'm thinking of one particular accessory for that, because it's got the electric winch. And I'm thinking, well, even in the honey room, lifting 20 kilo buckets of honey to decant those into a honey warmer, that's hard work too. So I'm making I'm just designing it at this stage, an accessory to go on the trolley so the winch lifts it up, and then I have a tipping mechanism so I can tilt the bucket and tip it cleanly into the honey tank. So I might even make a video on me making that. But certainly I'll be making a video on that hive lifting trolley. And I couldn't find anything in Australia like it, so I might use that as a basis for my own design after I've used it for a while, and if it works completely fine, that design might be fine. But everything can have improvements, right? Even beekeeping techniques. What else? I use a honey sump now. Instead of straining through a double strainer and then into a bucket, I use a honey sump. I don't have anywhere near the volume to justify something like a wax separator, like a spinner. The honey sump does the job. The wax floats to the top and goes through a series of baffles, but I'll show you that as a separate video. It's getting clogged. Might have to up the speed a little bit. Just a little bit. You can hear that motor going a bit more. Other gadgets. So I've got a number of different methods for uncapping frames before putting them into the extractor. So one of them is another American device, a roller arrangement that you push the frames down into and then pull them out, and it perforates the cappings. So it doesn't remove them, but perforates them. And I'll show the workings of that and things that I've found good about it and not so good. Also, I got a V-shaped decapper, and that was actually in Australia from a guy over in Perth. And that is a frame arrangement that you just slide the frame down and it just uncaps. So I won't describe any more than that because I'll show you in the video. It's really good. Another one I have is from Liga in Italy, and it uses a similar process as that first roller one from America, but it instead of moving the frame, you sort of mount the frame and use a lever, so it takes all the effort out of it. Plus it automatically discharges the frame at the finish of it and moves it along rails ready to pick up on the other side. So you can do 5 or 6 frames at a time and then move those into the extractor and move on to your next 5 or 6. So it makes it just that little bit more efficient. Not to the level of commercial beekeepers with their automatic uncappers with the vibrating knives and steam heated and all of that, but also a lot cheaper. So a video on that. I've got a Lyson honey creamer for making creamed honey. I actually haven't used that yet. I just took the opportunity to get it when I saw it, knowing that one day I'll use it. So that might be a bit further down the track after our season's finished. There's a small hive beetle in amongst them. So they've piggybacked the ride. So other gadgets are jar label applicating machines and bottling machine, a honey pump, so you don't have to bucket honey as much as before. I've got my heated honey drum. They call it a decrystallizer, but you can use it for multiple things. So you can set the temperature very precisely. It's a double jacketed arrangement. And it just makes honey so much easier to bottle, either manually with a gate or with the bottling machine, the dosing machine. The honey flows very, very nicely. It's still keeping it low enough that it's not overheating the honey and killing the enzymes. I've got wax processing equipment. I've got a couple of different pieces for that, different technologies. One is a steamer setup, so it's just a stainless steel vat with a strainer basket inside and water in the bottom that you boil, and then the steam goes up through the basket, the perforated basket, and then the wax just melts out and flows into the bucket you're catching it in. So that's another one. The other wax treatment is it's another Aussie made product, but the technology is pretty standard. It's a double jacketed stainless steel bin that you put water in the bottom level up to a tap, and then it heats the water and the wax that you throw in, and then the honey that's still in the wax sinks to the bottom, so you come up with honey water, and the clean wax floats in the middle and debris floats to the top. So you open the tap up that's in the middle and it flows straight out into your mould, clean. Works really well. Still have not spotted the queen, and I'm sort of distracted doing the actual vacuuming here, so just for a comparison, I'm going to pull the nozzle off and show you what it's like with just the nozzle. So I did have a bit of a blockage that I had to clear. Now I'll just demonstrate the open hose. Because it doesn't have that directed air, and I could ramp it up a bit, a lot faster breeze. I don't know, to me it just doesn't work as well, so I'm back the air off a bit and just get that nozzle back on. guessing I've vacuumed up the queen. That's got pretty much all of it. There's a few straggly flies around. You can probably smell their sisters inside coming out. That's the exhaust vent. And so they often hang around there. And if the queen's inside, her pheromone will start coming out. But with only a dozen or so bees left, it's not worth hanging around just to gather up half a dozen or a dozen bees. So I'll load this vacuum into the back of the car and get home and box them up. So this is the neighbour's property where I think the bees might have come from. Way over there. It's at least a couple of 100 metres away, maybe three or 400 metres away. Pretty spot over there. So I got that little colony, that little swarm home, put them into this little box, and I've got a feeder on top. It's only a small colony, so I was going to put them into a nuke, but it turns out I don't have one available. So I've put them into the 8-frame box, and yeah, I hear you, too big for a little swarm. But what I've done is partition it off on the inside with a little homemade follower board. I made it out of corflute, and so that's cut them down to 5 frames. So that should be right. I'll see how they go with that, and with the feeder boosting them, fingers crossed they'll stay put, and I'll report in at another time. Cheers, thanks for watching, and I know it was a pretty long video, but hopefully you got something out of it anyway. See ya.